William had a favorite woman when he was young. When she divorced and returned home, I was left behind in a downpour. That day, I borrowed an umbrella from a passing janitor. Went to the airport again and bought the nearest flight at random. Anywhere I wanted to go, I thought, as long as it wasn't William and Sophia. At 6 o'clock, William's car arrived home. He was greeted by the maid, not his wife Amanda. William then remembered that he had forgotten to pick up Sophia from the market because he was worried about her. But it's okay, his wife is gentle and never gets angry over such trivial matters. At 7 o'clock, the rain stopped, it was dark, and Amanda was still not home. William began to have some inexplicable panic. He called her 3 times, the first time no one answered. The second and third time, but no longer get through. That rainstorm came suddenly, and the sky seemed to darken in an instant. I ran under the eaves of a roadside house, to escape the rain in some distress. Somewhat bewildered, I looked at the heavy rain. An hour ago, William said he was coming to take me home. But now, his person is still nowhere to be seen. The girls around me who were hiding from the rain were picked up one after another. Their boyfriends or husbands tried their best to tilt their umbrellas over their heads, taking care of them. I think William should be protecting Sophia in the same way at this moment. The woman he loved when he was young. Then he missed her by mistake. I heard that he suffered a lot after marriage. During the 3 months of divorce proceedings, Sophia's mother passed away. William often worries so much that he can't sleep at night. And today is the day Sophia finally succeeded in her divorce and returned to China. When he woke up in the morning, William took a shower and changed into a newly customized suit. The matching tie had a light mandala pattern. After the wedding, I covered his clothes, food, and shelter. That tie, however, was not something I bought. It rained endlessly, as lively as refried beans. My heart, however, seemed to be suddenly quiet. "Auntie." I smiled and waved at the passing cleaning lady. The newly purchased seafood replaced the old umbrella in Auntie's hand. Seeing how happy she was, I couldn't help but curl my lips as well. The umbrella was old, but it could protect me from the wind and rain. It is better than a man who is late. I walked out of the market and casually stopped a cab on the side of the road. When I got to the airport, I realized that I didn't have a place to go. All I had left was my grandmother. But if I went to her, her old man would know that I must have been wronged. In the end, I bought a random flight to the nearest one. I thought, it's fine to go anywhere, as long as there's no William and Sophia. After 3 years of marriage, Sophia was like air, filling my life without a word. I didn't want to take it anymore. On the way to the airplane, my cell phone suddenly rang. The call was from William, and I thought twice about answering it. When the ringing stopped, I put his number on my blacklist. William got home at 6 o'clock. When the car pulled up, only the maid greeted him. He paused and took off his jacket, but instead of handing it to the maid, he put it on his arm. "Where's Mrs.? Mrs. hasn't returned yet." William's steps stopped. He then remembered that Amanda had improvised and gone to the market to buy live food. He had said he would pick her up and bring her home with him. But Sophia fainted from crying at her mother's grave. In his haste to get Sophia to the hospital, he forgot about picking her up. William glanced at the pouring rain outside. There was some hidden guilt in his heart. Will Amanda be angry? But just as this thought surfaced, William smiled and shook his head. He had never seen anyone with a gentler, more generous nature than his wife. And she'd never get angry over such a trivial matter. "Mister, I see that you've gotten caught in the rain, you'd better hurry up and take a hot bath." The maid reminded in a low voice. William nodded. "If Mrs. comes back, tell her I'm upstairs." He went upstairs to take a hot bath. But for some reason, the bath was also a bit disturbing. When he came out of the bathroom, he felt a bit stuffy. He wanted to take a cold pill, but couldn't find the medicine cabinet. William looked at his watch. It was almost 7 o'clock and Amanda was still not back. The rain outside seemed to have stopped, but it was a little darker. He took out his cell phone and called Amanda's number. It rang for a long time and no one answered until it finally hung up on itself. William frowned. This had never happened before. Amanda would never have missed his call. Maybe there had been a small accident on the road due to heavy rain and traffic? William felt his heart clench suddenly. He quickly called a second one. But the number that had worked a moment ago was not working. His eyebrows wrinkled deeper, gradually sinking cold. Yet he still patiently called the third one. It still could not be connected. He stood holding the phone for a while. Then casually looked it up on the internet. Oh, it turned out that he was blacklisted by the other party in this situation. William suddenly gasped and laughed. He felt that he should take back his words. I've never seen anyone with a more gentle and generous nature than his wife. It was late at night when the plane landed in that strange city. The signal was restored and new messages were coming in on my cell phone. I noticed several messages from an unknown number. Hi Riawe, it's Sophia. I heard that you and Jingzhao were angry with me and didn't come home. I'm worried and I'm sorry. I think I need to explain to you about Jingzhao and me. He did like me once, but that was when I was a child. Jingzhao always called me sister, and I treated him like a younger brother. Because of me, there is a gap between you two, and that's really not what I want to see. No one wants Jingzhao to be happy more than I do. Rongwei, after you receive my text message, can you give Jingzhao a call back? Or at least, let us know that you are safe. I felt ridiculous. If one is very worried about my well-being, there are countless ways. With a family like William's, finding out the information on my documents would be easy. But after I left home, the first people to look for me weren't the police. It was Sophia. I was really sick of the fact that Sophia would be quick to know about any slightest breeze in my life. I didn't reply. But Sophia was persistent and she called. I pressed answer. There was silence on the other end of the line. After a few moments, a very low chuckle suddenly came out. Then it was Su Man's voice, so you're not as good as Jingzhao said. You're really quite tolerant, it's been 3 years and you're just starting to make trouble. Amanda. Sophia suddenly called out my name. Since you're willing to take the initiative to vacate your position, I'll ask Jingzhao to give you more alimony. I smiled. Ms. Shu has been divorced once and fought a tough divorce case. I think she's very experienced, so thank you. If the split is more, I'll buy Ms. Shu coffee. After saying that, I just hung up the phone. Then I blacked out the number and set up a block on all unfamiliar calls. Amanda's third day away from home. William made a call to her grandmother, who was thousands of miles away. After exchanging pleasantries, he tried to say, Grandma, William said the other day that he wanted to go back to see you. No need to go back, I'm fine, it's a long way, don't bother. William clutched his cell phone, and on the large terrace, he could see the red sun sinking in the west. His heart seemed to be sinking with the sun, bit by bit. He knew that Amanda only had this one family member left. So he took it for granted that she must have gambled with him and gone back to her grandmother's place for the time being. But she hadn't gone after all. So where had Amanda been these past few days? He turned around and caught a glimpse of the familiar dresser. The dresser was clean as always, but her comb hadn't been put away in time. He walked over and picked it up. A few long strands of hair were tangled in the comb. Amanda's hair was nice and dark, never permed or colored. He clutched the comb in a bit of a deep thought trance. It was only when Sophia's call came for the second time that he came back to his senses. Jingzhao, I just passed by your garden and saw that the rosebuds have all withered. Sophia's voice came softly, let the florist clean it up, it's not pretty. No need. For the first time, he bluntly rejected Sophia. Sophia obviously froze for a moment, but quickly added, Jingzhao, are you angry? Yes, this is your and Rongwei's home, naturally you guys are in charge. Sophia's trailing voice had a choking sound in it. William's heart softened again. I don't mean that, sister. No news from Wing Mei? No. It's all my fault, I shouldn't have come back. Sophia cried out. William was a little annoyed for some reason as he listened to the tiny sobs. Amanda rarely cried. Only on the night of their wedding day, when he held her in his arms and cried for a while, because it hurt. And then there was the first year of their marriage, when he missed her birthday. It seemed that at the time, it was because Sophia's husband had been domestically abusive, and he was so worried that he had gone overseas overnight. William was inexplicably a little upset. Married for 3 years, he never knew Amanda had such a stubborn and willful side. He walked to the bedside and sat down. After thinking for a long time, he decided to call Amanda's only good friend. The friend was surprised and said she hadn't gotten a call from her. Amanda hadn't been in her city either. William's hand shook a little as he hung up the phone. He lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it. Amanda is a bit of a clean freak. When she was at home, any corner of the whole house was free of any odor. The cell phone was ringing again, but it was an unfamiliar landline. In the past, he would never answer this kind of call. But this time, he pressed answer first. Hello. His voice trembled a little. William, it's me, Amanda. For some reason, when Amanda's familiar voice rang out, William had always been a man of few words, but at this moment he was inexplicably a bit snappy. Amanda, you're not 3 years old anymore. Is running away from home such a childish thing to do at your age? Do you know what negative impact it will have on the Gu family if word gets out? I'm sorry. William clutched his cell phone and pulled off his tie. But he felt that the heavy boulder in his heart was suddenly removed. If you know you're wrong, hurry back. His tone was a little gentler. William, I was looking for you for something else. What is it? I sent you something, counting the time, you should have received it by now. What do you need to send? Why don't you just bring it back when you get home? Amanda's tone was still as gentle and calm as ever. I'm not going home. Sign for the delivery. If you have no objections, sign for it. I'll call you back in 2 days. This is a borrowed phone. Don't call me again. I can't answer it. Amanda, what do you mean? William felt that his heart suddenly lifted up again after he had just breathed a sigh of relief. William, I've been married to you for 3 years and I'm not happy. So, let's get a divorce. William didn't speak. Amanda didn't speak either, as if waiting politely for him to answer. Where are you now? It doesn't matter. William glanced out the window at the silent twilight. Amanda, what's your tantrum? On the other end of the line, Amanda didn't say another word. She seemed to let out a very low laugh. Then, directly hung up the phone. William almost subconsciously called back immediately. But the person who answered the phone again was already a strange aunt. She spoke a dialect from some unknown place that William couldn't understand. He could only apologize and hang up. The twilight was heavy, he was sitting in the deep twilight, motionless. Married for 3 years, Amanda is like a glass of lukewarm water that is always 45 degrees. She will not get angry, never lose her temper. She always speaks in a gentle voice. Everyone loved her and praised her. So much so that he had almost forgotten. The beginning of their marriage was just a feud between the elders. And she who was able to take the Gu family's eldest daughter-in-law position with that kind of petty favor. How could she be as generous and harmless and heartless as she appeared to be? William turned around and walked to the dressing table, putting down the comb he had been holding in his hand. He saw himself in the mirror. A tightly knit brow, a cloud of anger between his eyes. And he had never been one to show his emotions. Now he was stirred up by this little thing and lost his composure. William quickly returned to his usual expressionless face. He stepped out of the master bedroom and went downstairs. When Sophia called him from the living room downstairs, he only answered faintly. Let the maid bring over the packages signed for today. William picked out the letter from Amanda and opened it. Sophia stood to the side, covering her mouth and letting out a low gasp. William expressionlessly tore the divorce agreement into pieces and threw it into the trash can. Jingzhao. Sophia stepped forward and lightly tugged on his sleeve, gently advising. Don't be angry, Rongwei should just be impulsive. She has always been gentle and sensible. I think it is still my fault, if I do not go back to China, do not trouble you these things, she will not gamble. William's voice was slightly cold, what has it got to do with you? It's her own fault. She doesn't know what to do, aren't you the one who spoils her? Sophia smiled forcibly, when I was abroad, I didn't hear much about your couple's love. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly burst into tears. William coldly laughed. Why did you marry her in the first place? Others are not clear, are you not clear? Sophia looked at him in a daze with tears in her eyes. Jingzhao, is it really because of me? William did not answer, just lightly drew back his sleeve. I have to go out. Do you want the driver to take you back or stay here? Sophia wiped away her tears. I'll wait for you here. I won't be able to sleep when you and Rongwei are in such a mess. William nodded his head and instructed the maid to clean up the guest room. He also asked the driver to prepare the car and turned to leave. Sophia watched him leave. Another glance at the torn divorce agreement in the trash can. She pursed her lips and slowly sat down on the couch. Why would William tear up the divorce papers? He looked as if he had no intention of divorcing Amanda at all. I knew the day I left. William wanted to find out where a man was, easy as pie. It just depends on whether he wants to or not. So when I saw William downstairs at the BB, I wasn't surprised. In the early fall weather, he was wearing a light gray thin windbreaker, leaning against the car and smoking. He was handsome and tall, and his every move was eye-catching. In contrast, I looked extraordinary. Loose cotton linen dress, long hair tied up with a handkerchief. No makeup, carrying a shopping bag from the supermarket. More like a maid in the Gu family's old mansion. When I first married him, I was often ashamed of myself. But now, I have long since figured it out. Just as a home-cooked meal will never make it to the table of a fancy banquet, William and I have been together since the very beginning. William and I, from the beginning is wrong. He stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me with a pale expression. I also put down the shopping bag in my hand. William raised his wrist and looked at the watch, and when he opened his mouth, his voice was as calm and cold as ever. Go pack your things, 30 minutes should be enough. Have you signed the papers? I held out my hand to him. Give me the divorce papers, and I'll go back with you to do the paperwork. William's scanty eyes were still devoid of emotion. Only the color of his eyes was a little deeper. Now is not the right time to announce our divorce to the public. Then let's keep it quiet for now, just get the paperwork done. Amanda, you know, next week is the company's anniversary, you have to attend with me. William hooked his lips, a hint of a sneer in his smile. The timing of your disturbance is very precise. But you should know better, I'm not one to be taken advantage of. I didn't say anything, just looked at William quietly. We used to do the most intimate things as a couple. But men can separate sex and love. Women can't. The rain didn't wet my body, but my heart did. But William will never understand. Because he never loved me. If you sign the divorce, then I'll be with you next week for the anniversary. I'll do whatever cooperation is needed on the company's end. I looked at him and even smiled as gently as I had before. William, it won't hurt you one bit. Good. He looked at me deeply for a long time and finally nodded. I'll sign it at the end of the company's anniversary next week. I didn't go back with William. It was only the day before the start of the company's anniversary celebration that I took a flight back to Beijing. And in order to cover up, not let gossip reporters write nonsense about any marriage rumors. By his car, personally picked up from the airport, back to the wedding house. When I got out of the car, Sophia greeted me like a hostess. Wing Wei, you're finally back. She quickly stepped forward and held my hand, her eyes red and falling into tears. I looked at her lightly. The clothes, jewelry, and makeup were obviously well prepared. It was the kind of luxury that was very low-key yet comfortable. Just as every luxury family's wife and young lady, dressed like entertaining guests in their own home. I didn't say anything, just pulled my hand out. Sophia had done her nails beautifully, and wore a gemstone ring and a diamond ring on her white fingers. But there was nothing on my hand. The wedding ring had even been taken off earlier. There was even a thin callus on my palm. When I first learned of Sophia's existence, I foolishly compared myself to her in my mind. But now, no matter how beautiful she is, graceful, I have no ripples in my heart. I did not look at her again, nor did I respond. Carrying the bag, I walked forward around her. Sophia bit her lip in embarrassment. The maid greeted her and picked it up. I'll carry it, ma'am. I smiled and avoided it. No need. The maid didn't dare to say anything more and looked at William with some difficulty. Let her do as she pleases. William withdrew his sight and walked towards the main building. But I didn't go back to the main building with him. Instead, I went to the secondary building where the guests were being treated. Amanda. William finally got angry. Maybe it was because I was really embarrassing him and Sophia by doing this in front of a bunch of servants. I didn't stop and I didn't answer. I didn't have any desire to communicate with William. All I wanted now was that the anniversary celebration end early and smoothly. And then this marriage of ours, too, could end sooner. As William and I entered the ballroom arm in arm, the atmosphere was at its peak. He was a tender and caring husband, and I was, as always, the gentle wife that everyone praised. As we exchanged pleasantries, he clasped his fingers with mine. From time to time, he would look at me with a sideways glance, his eyes gentle. I will also bow my head and smile. But once upon a time, that smile was a heartfelt shyness and joy. Now it's a mask. I dislike this kind of myself, also spit on this kind of him. I just hoped it would be over sooner. But at the end of the dinner, there was a dish of sashimi in front of me. The faint fishy smell hit my nose, and my stomach suddenly flipped. Out of character, I got up and quickly went to the restroom and threw up. When I got up, I blacked out again. When I opened my eyes again, I was already in the hospital. There were many people from the Gu family, and William was sitting next to my bed. He held my hand with a rare joy on his face. "Rongwei, do you know that you are pregnant? Just turned 45 days old." His voice was low and gentle as if he was afraid it would scare me. I was suddenly in a trance. William rarely showed such tenderness. 3 years had flown by in a flash, but only a handful of times. And the number of times he and Sophia saw each other during those 3 years was also very few. But every time, he was very gentle. Only, the tenderness to Sophia, just because that is his favorite person. And to my tenderness, once upon a time, not because of me. Now, it's just for the baby in my belly. Grandmother already knows about your pregnancy. He clutched my hand, and the smile at the corner of his lips was also soft. "I've already sent someone to fetch her old man over." She was very happy. She was so excited on the phone that she cried. I was lying on the bed, and suddenly I also shed a tear. After 3 years of marriage, I was not pregnant, which was a problem for my grandmother. But Grandma never knew that I didn't get pregnant because William said he didn't want to have children. He wanted to spend a few years as a couple first. He'd been very careful with his birth control. But why was he so jubilant now? The hospital room was quiet after the Gu family left. "You take care of your body and get your baby at ease." I pushed the glass of warm water away. "I don't want this baby." The emotion on William's face didn't fluctuate at all. He lowered his head and looked down at me. "You can talk to Grandma yourself. As long as you're willing to let Grandma grieve for you at your age." William was certain that I would continue to bend over backwards to keep Grandma from worrying. But he forgot. When my grandmother was young, she dared to remove her foot binding and fight her parents. She dared to withdraw from her marriage and run away to join her relatives thousands of miles away by herself. She dared to divorce her husband after he became addicted to drugs and sneak away her only daughter. Now that she's older, she seems fragile and kind and uncontested. But what I know, if Grandma knew about William and me, she would have supported all my decisions. William put off all the things in the company. Started to guard me single-mindedly. I fainted at the anniversary celebration and found out that I was pregnant, and the rumor has been spreading for a long time. Reporters and media surrounded me outside the hospital. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, the Gu family picked me up in a big battle. Everyone said I was lucky. This kind of origin married into the Gu family, husband considerate in-laws love and pregnant. It's a winner in life. It's funny, when the world evaluates a woman's winners and losers, they often look at the chips that men attach to her. No one pays attention to her. No one cares about her actual life, and how dark it is. Sophia has left Beijing. Her grandparents want her to go back and live there permanently. In the car, William held my hand. "I've told you from the beginning that Sophia and I are not in love. We grew up together. When we were young, she saved my life. She broke her forehead and still has a scar. I loved her when I was a kid, but now I just think of her as my sister. Amanda, there's really no reason for you to bother about such a trivial matter. But since you mind, I'll pay attention to it in the future. I won't meet Sophia in private or have any other dealings with her again." William gripped my shoulder and tried to pull me into his arms. "That's the end of the matter. We'll have a child, and in the future, we'll have a good life as a family of 3, okay?" At that time, I almost believed it. I heard that when a woman is pregnant, she secretes a hormone. That hormone will make her unable to harm the tiny embryo in her belly. In the past few days, I'd been conflicted, torn, and shaken. Grandma also said to me, "The husband can be someone else's, but the child will always be your own." Honestly, for a moment I thought about it. Maybe finding out that I was pregnant at this time was a chance that God had given William and me. No woman wants to kill her own child with her own hands. I'm no exception. But just as I was wavering, Sophia found a way to get in touch with me. Do you know why from half a year ago, Jing Zhao suddenly stopped using birth control? I was stunned. It seemed like it did start from that time. William didn't intentionally use contraception anymore. Because I decided to get a divorce at that time. You must want to say that I decided to get a divorce, so Jing Zhao should be more careful about contraception. Sophia suddenly laughed when she said this. She laughed a little harshly, and a little ruefully. Amanda, I can't have children. If I could bear children, why would Jing Zhao compromise and marry you in the first place? So, do you know how your child came to be? He only came into this world to pave the way for me. I shouldn't have told you this at this time. I should have waited until it was ripe and the baby was born. But Amanda. There was a cynicism in her voice that burned. I've changed my mind. I'd rather ruin this path than have you give birth to Jing Zhao's child. I sat there, feeling very cold. It was as if the coldness had instantly spread from the soles of my feet to my entire body. But surprisingly, I didn't cry either. Instead, there was an inexplicable sense of relief. I clearly perceived. To William all the emotions, all the ties. Just like this lightly and completely let go. Have you ever thought that if I listened to you, I would have to have this baby? You're not like that. You seem gentle, generous, patient, tolerant. But you can't hold a grain of sand in your eyes. I suddenly smiled. Sophia, thank you for telling me this. Amanda, don't hate me, I just love him too much. You know, love is always selfish and blind. I didn't say anything. I cut the call and stood up, walking over to the window. In the garden at dusk, the rosebuds were almost all faded. A gust of wind blew, and the last of them on the branches fell to the soil. The flowers have fallen. The dream should also wake up completely. The day William last sat down with Amanda for dinner. She was wearing a light green dress. There was something familiar about that dress. He thought about it for a while before remembering. The first time they met, Amanda seemed to be wearing a similar one. At that time, he had failed to fight against his family. Sophia was heartbroken and desperate, and she married in a foreign country. He coped with meeting Amanda, trying to find an excuse to get rid of her. But unbearable and cruel words, but said the beginning. She was red-eyed. William had never seen a girl shed so many tears. Her eyes were huge, and those tears gathered in her sockets. It took a while for them to fall. She choked out, I'm sorry, I really didn't know that you were forced to come and see me. I will go back and tell the elders of my family to break off this engagement of ours. She was so embarrassed that she cried because of his harsh words that came out of his mouth. But she still apologized to him. William watched as she cried and stood up, knocking over the coffee again. The coffee stains stained her light green dress. She looked down and wiped it away, tears falling down one by one. Somehow, his heart moved slightly. Thoughts of hopeless romances. Thinking of Sophia who married someone else. He actually developed a kind of decadence that went with the flow. Your name is Amanda, isn't it? She nodded, yes. You want to marry me? She pursed her lips as she clutched her skirt. Long, curly, thick lashes fell down, hiding the slightly red eyes. She nodded very softly, but her face flushed. Then let's get married. She abruptly then widened her eyes, the bottom of her eyes a piece of dismay and surprise. But you just. He laughed, leaning back on the back of the chair, lazily looking at her. Gu family children and grandchildren's skins are all born good. What's more, at that time, he was still young and vigorous, slightly still a little flirty and frivolous. When he looked at her like that and smiled, she was shy. I'm just teasing you, wrong way sister, don't go back to my grandmother and tell her off. She was busy shaking her head, no, I won't tattle. When she finished speaking, her ears turned red at the roots, and she didn't even dare to look at him again. After the date, he sent her home. When he got off the bus, he held her hand. 3 months later, they were engaged. 7 months later, she married him. And now, she's been married to him for 3 years. With their child in her belly. William felt a very strange emotion welling up inside his heart. The child had come as promised within his plans. He should rejoice. But that rejoicing, however, seemed to have other meanings. These days, he often couldn't help but think. Would it be a boy or a girl? Of course it would be best if it was a boy. But if it's a girl and looks like Amanda, it should be good too. But why would he want the child to look like Amanda? His original intention was that this child, in the future, would call Sophia's mom. William vaguely felt that something seemed to be getting out of control. But he, surprisingly, did not want to hang on to the cliff. He inexplicably wanted to lose control to the end. That day's dinner was made by Amanda herself. She didn't have any pregnancy sickness that day and was in good spirits. So he let her be. She even accompanied him and drank a little bit of fruit wine that was harmless to pregnant women. When he was slightly drunk, he thought Amanda looked so extraordinarily beautiful. "Are you wearing makeup?" "Just a little bit. The color of your lipstick is very pretty." "Thank you." She smiled and her eyes curved slightly. He smiled back. Standing up, he walked behind her and propped his hands on the arms of the chair beside her. William lowered his head, and the high bridge of his nose brushed against her thick sideburns. It was ear-to-ear charming. "I'll have the maid move your things back to the master bedroom?" She didn't nod, yet she didn't shake her head either. Just picked up her wine glass and clinked it with him again. Later, he took her for a walk in the garden. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse, and a layer of slightly withered rose petals had fallen on the lawn. She was very quiet on that walk. Only the early fall wind blew through the hem of her long skirt. William followed her, suddenly a little drunk. He felt that the picture looked a little bit of the flavor of the good old days. Later she went back to the master bedroom or not, he did not remember too clearly. He slept heavily and for a long time. When he woke up from that sleep, it was already noon the next day. He rolled over and subconsciously touched the bed beside him, Amanda. The hangover made his head hurt a little. It was with great reluctance that he sat up. The bedroom was empty, and there was only one pillow on the big bed. She hadn't come over to stay last night. And William didn't know it yet at the time. Not just last night. Amanda wouldn't come back here for another step in the days and nights from now on. When I came out of surgery, my grandmother was waiting outside to take me out of the hospital. I was wrapped in a thick coat, but I was still shivering with cold. After the anesthesia wore off, I began to feel a vague pain deep in my abdomen. Grandma put a warm water bag on my belly and held my hand tightly. Wei, come home with Grandma." Her body was a little hunched and her legs were bent. But her hand was still warm and strong. It was like it gave me great courage to move forward. I told the Gu family that we don't want to pay back any favors. Grandma understands better than anyone that Chida is not a spouse. Grandma doesn't blame anyone for what's happened, she just feels sorry for you. I leaned on Grandma's shoulder and pampered myself. "If you feel sorry for me, then make me a bowl of egg custard. It's been a long time since I've had egg custard made by Grandma. From now on, Grandma will make it for you every day." I supported Grandma, and Grandma supported me. The midday sunlight fell on us, and I finally felt warm. When I walked to the hospital entrance, I saw William's car. He got out of the car, his face cold, the corners of his lips pursed into a line. Grandma subconsciously tried to shield me behind her. But I gently shook my head. William strides up to me, and he reaches out to take my shoulders in his hands. "Amanda, where's the baby?" "Got rid of it." How dare you, Amanda?" He clasped my shoulders, his fingers gradually getting harder. I could see his pale, stone-faced face. His eyes were churning with anger and pain. "Does it hurt?" "It hurts just fine." I broke his fingers, one by one. "Please sign the papers quickly and get the divorce finalized." "I'm not divorcing you." William's voice was deep and cold, one word at a time. I was a little surprised, but not overly emotional. "Then let's file a lawsuit. If you want to make a big deal out of it. What was once a so-called beautiful story becomes a joke after dinner." I smiled indifferently. "I'll go along with that." William wanted to say something else. But his cell phone suddenly rang. I vaguely heard Sophia's name again. Then his face changed. "Got it, I'll be right there." He responded in a sharp tone. Hanging up the phone, he looked at me again. "Amanda, wait for me to come back and we'll talk about it." But I didn't wait for him to come back to talk to him. I went straight to Mrs. Gu. Didn't hide anything, and didn't add a single word to the conversation. Just restated what Sophia said as it was. Mrs. Gu couldn't accept Sophia, who couldn't bear children. She was the villain who beat the lovebirds with a stick. Pinched her nose again and forced by the pressure of the elders to accept a daughter-in-law like me. Over the past 3 years, she has not treated me coldly or warmly, but she has not treated me harshly either. When she learned that I was pregnant, she was actually very happy. But now, her grandson is gone. I think even if she hates me, what she hates more will only be Sophia. Sophia wants to reconnect with William. I'm afraid she won't be able to get past Mrs. Gu for the rest of her life. Sophia has a point. I'm actually not generous at all. I'm very petty. I hope that the people I like only have me in their hearts and eyes. I also hope that people who hurt me don't live happily ever after for the rest of their lives. Because when they hurt innocent people, they also never had any mercy or guilt. Mrs. Gu was a very decisive woman. Just as back then, she sharply clubbed her lovebirds and forced Sophia to marry far away. Now she strikes again. William and I soon dissolved our relationship as husband and wife in the legal sense. As for Sophia, under Mrs. Gu's thunderous tactics, the Shu family couldn't withstand the pressure and started forcing her to marry again. I heard that she even committed suicide. William guarded her in the hospital for a day and a night. I also heard that William was so mad that he wanted to marry Sophia. Mrs. Gu was so angry that she slapped him twice and wanted to kick him out of the Gu family. But all this has nothing to do with me. I followed my grandmother back to her small county, thousands of miles away. Granny's small yard was renovated and cleaned up. I plan to plant a yard full of rosebuds in the spring of next year. When I was out of the small month, William suddenly came to me. Grandma didn't open the door to the yard. He stayed out there until the wee hours of the morning. The next morning, when I went out to get the milk, I saw him again. It was early winter and he was wearing a thin coat, while I was wrapped in one of Grandma's cotton robes for fear of the cold. You see, we always seemed like people from two worlds. Neighbors curiously gawked at him and stopped in their tracks. After all, it's rare to see such a handsome and expansive man in a small county like ours. But I only took one look at him and averted my eyes. When I was young, I was attracted by his skin, and foolishly married without hesitation. But after all, marriage is like drinking water, cold and warm. I chose my own path, and I accept it and recognize it. William also did not say anything, but he followed me all the way. I finished taking the milk, went to buy breakfast, turned around and came back. He also followed me all the way until I reached the entrance of the courtyard. Wing V. He finally opened his mouth and called my name. Without stopping, I pushed the courtyard door open and went inside, turning around and getting ready to close it. Instead, William stepped forward and reached out to block it. William, Sophia is getting married next spring. When I was growing up, I never seemed to lose my temper with anyone. Not even when I got into an argument with someone. But this time I suddenly snapped. Warm milk was thrown around his face. His smashingly expensive coat, and the cashmere sweater inside were stained. A little dismayed, he frowned. Amanda. William, if you're the one she's marrying next spring, then I still respect you as a man. But now it seems that you don't love her that much. After all, if you give up your position as heir to the Koo family, you can marry her. And you can't. Amanda's words were only half right. It's true that he doesn't love Sophia that much. But it wasn't because he couldn't let go of the so-called heirship. He just really, long ago, no longer loved her as he did when he was young. After Amanda got pregnant, William actually thought about it. Their family of 3, just live well. That once had a nasty and despicable thought, he would bury it in the bottom of his heart for the rest of his life. He had crossed the line with Sophia late at night in a foreign country out of sympathy and pity. On impulse, he gave Sophia a promise of children and marriage. But in fact, he regretted it a long time ago. But Sophia told Amanda. And then, without hesitation, she got rid of the baby. And the moment he found out the baby was gone, William had only one thought in mind. That he couldn't keep Amanda. Like a rosebush, what's done is done. But Amanda was everywhere in their matrimonial home. The servants often talk about how Mrs. like it, if Mrs. no. And himself. Every time he came home at 6 o'clock. He knew that the person had long since left, but he still hoped that it was her who came out to greet him. He used to think that Amanda was a cup of lukewarm water, always at a constant temperature of 45 degrees. An unimportant presence. But how can you live without water? He often thought of their last dinner. The way she drank a little fruit punch. The beautiful color of lipstick she wore that day. He often wondered if later, on the walk, he'd held her hand. He hugged her from behind. He'd say, honey, softly. Would she soften her heart and give him another chance? He often wondered if he hadn't forgotten to pick her up that day in the rain. He had appeared in front of her in time. The ending of the story would have been completely rewritten. But there was no point in talking about it anymore. He could only tell himself to move on. Amanda was still single. Amanda has rejected many men who have pursued her. After all, Amanda loved him very much back then. He visited her 2 or 3 times a year. But on his 9th visit, the same story played out again. But the hero of the story was no longer him. It was raining hard that day, just like the time he forgot to pick her up. But this time, the hero didn't make the same mistake as he did. The man's car came to a steady stop in the pouring rain. Amanda stood under the eaves of the porch to hide from the rain. When she saw the car coming, she wanted to run over and get into the car. But the man waved his hand to stop her. First, he got out of the car in the rain, soaked to the skin, and went to get an umbrella. Then he quickly walked to her, open umbrella almost all tilted to her, escorted her to the car first. In fact, it is very close to the road, only 2 or 3 steps. But the man did not want her to get wet in the rain. He would rather be drenched by the rain himself. William just sat in the car, watching the scene in a stunned silence. The windshield wipers were swinging rapidly, one by one. The whole world was almost swallowed up by the rain. The car with Amanda in it sped away, never to be seen again. And that downpour from years ago. The rain, he had forgotten about Amanda. But a long time later, it poured down on him. William smiled miserably. He started the car and turned it around. The car was like an arrow, piercing through the dense rain. At a certain moment, he seemed to see the young Amanda again. They had just gotten engaged. His mother didn't like her, but his grandmother did. At the time of their engagement, Grandma had told her, "Rongwei, if Jingzhao bullies you, come and tell Grandma, she'll back you up." So at that time, every time she was teased by him, she would always say, "I'll go to Grandma to complain." He couldn't help but smile. Then he remembered their wedding night. When she cried from the pain, he held her in his arms and coaxed her, deliberately jokingly saying, "Why don't you say that you will go to Grandma to complain?" She cried and laughed, and was so angry that she pounced on him and bit him. And he lowered his head and kissed her, and she obediently closed her eyes under him again. In fact, when he first met Amanda back then, he had already fallen in love with her. It's just a pity that people often sigh in regret when the flowers fall. And when the flowers are in full bloom, they don't see how happy they are and how much they cherish them. The year after Amanda divorced him, the rosebuds in the marital home all died. Thousands of miles away in a small town, Grandma's yard was full of roses. But those blooming flowers had long since ceased to belong to him. William suddenly tilted his face up. He was afraid that he would fall into tears in a state of wretchedness. Right here in the middle of the pouring rain. In the new life that Amanda has begun. End of story.